Chapter 2, in which Moomintroll suffers an uncomfortable change and takes his revenge on the antlion, and how Moomintroll and Snufkin go on a secret night expedition. One warm summer day, it was raining softly in the Valley of the Moomins, so they all decided to play hide and seek indoors. Sniff stood in the corner with his nose in his paws and counted up to 10 before he turned round and began hunting, first in the ordinary hiding places, and then in the extraordinary ones. Moomintroll lay under the veranda table feeling rather worried. It wasn't a good hiding place. Sniff would be sure to lift the tablecloth, and there he would be stuck. He looked about, and then caught sight of a tall black hat which stood in a corner. That would be a brilliant idea. Sniff would never think of looking under the hat. Moomintroll stole quietly into the corner and pulled the hat over his head. It didn't reach further than his middle, but if he made himself very small and tucked in his tail, he would be quite invisible. He giggled to himself when he heard all the others being found, one after another. The Hemulin had obviously hidden himself under the sofa again. He could never find a better place. And now they were all running about searching for Moomintroll. He waited until he was afraid they would get bored with the search. And then he crept out of the hat, stuck his head through the door, and said, "Look at me!" Sniff stared at him for a long time, then said rather unkindly, "Look at yourself." "Who's that?" whispered the Snork. But the others only shook their heads and continued to stare at Moomintroll. Poor little chap! He had been turned into a very strange animal indeed under the hobgoblin's hat. All his fat parts had become thin, and everything that was small had grown big. And the strangest thing about it was that he himself didn't realize what was the matter. "I thought I'd surprise you all," he said, taking an uncertain step forward on his long, spindly legs. "You've no idea where I've been." "It doesn't interest us," said the Snork, "but you're certainly ugly enough to surprise anybody." "You are unkind," said Moomintroll sadly. "I suppose you got tired of hunting. What shall we do now?" "First of all, perhaps you should introduce yourself," said the Snork Maiden stiffly. "We don't know who you are, do we?" Moomintroll looked at her incredulously, but then it dawned on him that perhaps this was a new game. He laughed delightedly and said, "I am the King of California." "And I'm the Snork Maiden," said the Snork Maiden. "This is my brother." "I'm called Sniff," said Sniff. "I'm Snufkin," said Snufkin. "Oh dear, how boring you all are," said Moomintroll. "Couldn't you have thought of something more original? Now let's go out. I think the weather's clearing." And he went down the steps into the garden, followed by a rather surprised and suspicious little trio. "Who's that?" asked the Hemulin, who was sitting in front of the house, counting the stamens of a flower. "It's the King of California, I think," said the Snork Maiden. "Is he going to live here?" asked the Hemulin. "That's for Moomintroll to decide," said Sniff. "I wonder where he's got to." Moomintroll laughed. "You really are quite funny at times," he said. "Shall we go and look for Moomintroll?" "Do you know him?" asked Snufkin. "Yes," said Moomintroll. "Well, rather well, as a matter of fact." He was thoroughly enjoying the new game and thought he was doing rather well at it. How do you come to know him?" asked the Snork Maiden. "We were born at the same time," said Moomintroll, still bursting with laughter. "But he's an impossible fellow, you know. You simply can't have him in the house." "How dare you talk about Moomintroll like that?" said the Snork Maiden fiercely. "He's the best Moomin in the world, and we think a great deal of him." This was almost too much for Moomintroll. "Really?" he said. "Personally, I think he's an absolute pest." Then the Snork Maiden began to cry. Go away, said the Snork to Moomintroll. Otherwise we shall have to sit on your head. All right, Moomintroll said, soothingly. It's only a game, isn't it? I'm awfully glad you don't think so much of me. Oh, I'm awfully glad you think so much of me. But we don't, screamed Sniff shrilly. Take away this ugly king who runs down our Moomintroll. And they threw themselves onto poor Moomintroll. He was much too surprised to defend himself, and when he began to get angry, it was too late. So when Moomin Mama came out on the steps, he was lying underneath a large pile of flailing paws and tails. What are you doing there, children? She cried. Stop fighting at once. They're walloping the King of California, sniffed the Snork Maiden, and it serves him right. Moomintroll crawled out of the scrum, tired out and angry. Mother, he cried, they started it. 3 against 1. It's not fair. I quite agree, said Moomin Mama seriously. However, I expect you had teased them. But who are you, my little beast? Oh, please stop this awful game, wailed Moomintroll. It isn't funny any more. I am Moomintroll and you are my mother, and that's that. You aren't Moomintroll, said the Snark Maiden scornfully. He has beautiful little ears, but yours look like kettle holders. Moomintroll felt quite confused and took hold of a pair of enormous crinkly ears. But I am Moomintroll, he burst out in despair. Don't you believe me? Moomintroll has a nice little tail, just about the right size, but yours is like a chimney sweep's brush, said the Snork. And, oh dear, it was true. Moomintroll fell behind him with a trembling paw. Your eyes are like soup plates, said Sniff. Moomintrolls are small and kind. Yes, exactly, Snufkin agreed. You are an impostor, decided the Hemulan. Isn't there anyone who believes me? Moomintroll pleaded. Look carefully at me, Mother. You must know your own Moomintroll. Moomin Mama looked carefully. She looked into his frightened eyes for a very long time, and then said quietly, Yes, you are my Moomintroll. And at the same moment he began to change. His ears, eyes, and tail began to shrink, and his nose and tummy grew, until at last he was his old self again. It's all right now, my dear, said Moomin Mama. You see, I shall always know you, whatever happens. A little later on, Moomintroll and the Snork were sitting in one of their secret hiding places, the one under the jasmine bush, which was hidden by a curtain of green leaves. Yes, but you must have done something to change you, the Snork was saying. Moomintroll shook his head. I didn't notice anything unusual, he said, and I didn't say any dangerous words either. But perhaps you stepped into a fairy ring, suggested the Snork. Not that I know of, said Moomintroll. I sat the whole time under that black hat that we used as a waste paper basket. In the hat? Asked the Snork suspiciously. Moomintroll nodded, and they both thought for a long time. Then suddenly they burst out together. It must be! And stared at each other. Come on, said the Snork. They went on to the veranda and crept up to the hat cautiously, very cautiously. It looks rather ordinary, said the Snork, unless you consider that a top hat is always somewhat extraordinary, of course. But how can we find out if it was that? Asked Moomintroll. I'm not going to get into that again. Perhaps we could lure somebody else into it, suggested the Snork. But that would be a low-down trick, said Moomintroll. How should we know that he would be all right again? What about an enemy? Suggested the Snork. Said Moomintroll. Do you know of one? The pig swine, said the Snork. Moomintroll shook his head. He's too big. Well, the antlion then? The Snork suggested. That's a good idea, Moomintroll agreed. He once pulled my mother down into a hole and sprayed sand into her eyes. So they set out to look for the antlion, and took a big jar with them. You should look for antlions. You should look for antlions' holes in a sandy place. So they wandered down to the beach, and it wasn't long before the Snork discovered a big round hole and signaled eagerly to Moomintroll. "Here he is," whispered the Snork. "But how shall we lure him into the jar?" "Leave it to me," whispered the Moomintroll, and he took the jar and buried it under in the sand a little distance away with the opening on top. Then he said loudly, "They are very weak creatures, these antlions." He signaled to the Snork, and they both looked expectantly down at the hole, but although the sand moved a bit, nothing was to be seen. "Very weak," said Moomintroll. "It takes several hours for them to dig themselves down into the sand, you know." "Yes, but," said the Snork doubtfully. "It does, I tell you," said Moomintroll, making frantic signs with his ears. "Several hours." At that moment, a threatening head with staring eyes popped up from the hole in the sand. "Did you say weak?" hissed the antlion. "I can dig myself down in exactly 3 seconds." "You should really show us how it's done, so that we can believe such a wonderful feat as possible," said Moomintroll persuasively. "I shall spray sand on you," replied the antlion very crossly, "and when I have sprayed you down into my hole, I shall gobble you up." "Oh no," pleaded the Snork. "Couldn't you show us how to dig down backwards in 3 seconds instead?" "Do it up here so we can see better how it's done," said Moomintroll, and pointed to the spot where the jar was buried. "Do you think I'm going to bother myself with showing tricks to babies?" said the antlion huffily. But all the same he simply could not resist the temptation to show them how strong and quick he was. So, with scornful sniffings, he scrambled up his hole, and asked haughtily, "Now, where should I dig myself in?" "There," said Moomintroll, pointing. The antlion drew up his shoulders and raised his mane in a terrifying manner. "Out of my way," he cried. "Now I'm going underground, but when I come back I shall gobble you up. 1, 2, 3." He backed down into the sand like a whirling propeller, right into the jar which was hidden under him. It certainly did only take 3 seconds, or perhaps 2.5, because he was so awfully angry. "Quick with the lid!" cried Moomintroll, and scraping away the sand, they screwed it on very tightly. Then they both heaved up the jar and began to roll it home, with the antlion inside screaming and cursing and choking with sand. "It's frightful how angry he is," said the Snork. "I daren't think what will happen when he comes out." "He won't come out now," said the Moomintroll quietly, "and when he does I hope he will be changed into something horrible." When they arrived at Moomin House, Moomintroll summoned everyone with 3 long whistles, which means something quite extraordinary has happened. The others arrived from all directions and collected around the jar with the screw top. "What have you got there?" asked Sniff. "An antlion," said Moomintroll proudly. "A genuine, furiously angry antlion that we have taken prisoner." "Fancy you, darling," said the Snork Maiden admiringly. "Now I think we will pour him into the hat," said the Snork. "So that he will be changed like I was," said Moomintroll. "Will somebody please tell me what all this is about?" the Hemulin asked plaintively. "It was because I hid in the hat that I was changed," explained Moomintroll. "We worked it out, and now we're going to make sure by seeing if the antlion will turn into something else as well." But but he could turn into absolutely anything," squeaked Sniff. "He can turn into something still more dangerous than an antlion and gobble us all up in a minute." They stood in terrified silence, looking at the pot and listening to the muffled sounds coming from inside. "Oh," said the Snork Maiden, turning rather pale. But Snufkin suggested they should all hide under the table while the change took place, and put a big book on top of the hat. "You must always take risks when experimenting," he said. Tip it in now at once." Sniff scrambled under the table, while Moomintroll, Snufkin, and Hemulin held the jar over the hobgoblin's hat, and the Snark gingerly unscrewed the lid. In a cloud of sand the antlion tumbled out, and, quick as lightning, the Snark popped a dictionary of outlandish words on top. Then they all dived under the table and waited. At first nothing happened. They peeped out from under the tablecloth, getting more and more agitated. Still, there was no change. "It was all rot," said Sniff, but at that moment the big dictionary began to crinkle up, and in his excitement Sniff bit the Hemulin's thumb, thinking it was his own. Now the dictionary was curling up more and more. The pages began to look like withered leaves, and between them the outlandish words came out and began crawling around on the floor. "Goodness gracious me," said Moomintroll, but there was more to come. Water began to drip from the brim of the hat, and then to overflow and splash down onto the carpet, so that the words had to climb up the walls to save themselves. "The antlion has only turned into water," said the Snufkin in disappointment. "I think it's the sand," whispered the Snork. "The antlion is sure to come soon." They waited again for an unbearably long time. The Snorkmaiden hid her face in Moomintroll's lap, and Sniff whimpered with fright. Then, suddenly, on the edge of the hat appeared the world's smallest hedgehog. He sniffed the air and blinked, and he was very tangled and wet. There was dead silence for a couple of seconds. Then Snufkin began to laugh, and in a very short time they were all howling and rolling about under the table in pure delight. All, that is, except the Hemulin, who did not join in the fun. He looked in surprise at his friends and said, "Well, we expected the antlion to change, didn't we? If only I could understand why you always make such a fuss about things." Meanwhile, the little hedgehog had wandered solemnly and a little sadly to the door and out down the steps. The water had stopped flowing and now filled the veranda like a lake, and the whole ceiling was covered with outlandish words. When the whole thing had been explained to Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama, they took it very seriously and decided that the hobgoblin's hat should be destroyed. So it was rolled cautiously down to the river and dropped into the water. "There goes the clouds and the magic changes," said Moomin Mama as they watched the hat gliding away. "The clouds are fun," said Moomintroll rather dejectedly. "I shouldn't mind having them back." "And the flood and the words, too, I suppose," Moomin Mama said crossly. "Look at the veranda, and I can think what I shall do with these little creeping words. They're all over the place and making the whole house untidy." "But the clouds were fun, anyway," said Moomintroll obstinately. And that night he couldn't sleep, but lay looking out at the light June night, which was full of lonely whisperings and rustlings and the pattering of feet. The air was sweet with the smell of flowers. Snufkin wasn't in yet. On such nights he often wandered about alone with his mouth organ, but tonight there was no song to be heard. He was probably on a voyage of discovery, and soon he would put up his tent by the river, refusing to sleep indoors. Moomintroll sighed. He felt sad, but didn't know why. Just then a faint whistle came from the garden. Moomintroll's heart gave a bound, and he tiptoed softly to the window and looked out. The whistle meant secrets. Snufkin was waiting under the rope ladder. "Can you keep a secret?" he whispered when Moomintroll had clambered down onto the grass. Moomintroll nodded eagerly, and Snufkin leant towards him and whispered again. "The hat had floated to land on a sandbank down the river." "What about it?" asked Snufkin's eyebrows, and Moomintroll's ears waggled a big yes. The next minute they were creeping like shadows through the dewy garden down towards the river. "You know, it's really our duty to save that hat, because all the water that fills it is red," said Snufkin. Those who live far down the river will be panic-stricken by all this awful water. We must have known something like that would happen, said Moomintroll. He felt very proud to be walking along like this, with Snufkin in the middle of the night. Snufkin had always done his night wandering alone before. It's somewhere here, Snufkin said. There's the dark streak in the water. Do you see? Not properly, said Moomintroll, who was stumbling along in the half-dark. I haven't got night eyes like you. I wonder how we're going to get it, said Snufkin, looking out of the water. So foolish of your father not to have a boat. Moomintroll hesitated. I swim quite well. Anyway, if the water isn't too cold, he said. You wouldn't dare, said Snufkin. I certainly would, Moomintroll retorted, suddenly feeling very brave. Where is it now? Across there, said Snufkin. You'll soon touch bottom on the sandbank, but take care that you don't put your foot in the hat. Hold the ground a bit. Moomintroll slipped down into the warm summer water and swam dogwise out into the river. There was a strong current, and for a moment he felt a bit frightened. Then he saw the sandbank with something black on it, and steering with his tail, he soon felt sand under his feet. Is everything all right? Called Snufkin from the shore, and an answering cry came from Moomintroll as he waded onto the sandbank. There was a dark steam curling out of the hat and down into the river. It was the red water. Moomintroll stuck his paw into it and then licked it cautiously. Goodness gracious me, he muttered. It's raspberry juice. Just think, from now on we can have as much raspberry juice as we want by just filling the hat with water. And his Pee-hoo war cry went over the river to Snufkin, who shouted back impatiently, Well, have you got it? Yes, Moomintroll shouted, wading into the water again with his tail in a firm knot around the hobgoblin's hat. It is difficult to swim against the current with a heavy hat dragging behind you, and when Moomintroll struggled up the bank, he was terribly tired. Here it is, he puffed proudly. Fine, said Snufkin. But now, what shall we do with it? Well, we can't keep it in Moomin House, said Moomintroll, nor in the garden. Somebody would find it. At last they decided on the cave, but not to let Sniff into the secret, although it was really his cave, because he was rather a small person for such a big secret. You know, said Moomintroll seriously, it's the first time we have done anything that we couldn't tell Mother and Father about. Snufkin took the hat in his arms and began going back by the river, but when they came to the bridge he suddenly stopped. What is it? Whispered Moomintroll in alarm. Canaries! Snufkin burst out. 3 yellow canaries there on the bridge. How strange to see them out at night. I'm not a canary, peeped the nearest bird. I'm a roach. We are respectable fishes, all 3, his friend twittered. Snufkin scratched his head. There, you see what the hat is getting up to, he said. Those 3 little fishes were swimming in it, I'm sure, and they were changed. Come on, we'll go straight to the cave and hide that hat. Moomintroll kept close behind Snufkin as they went through the wood. There were rustlings and patterings on both sides of the path, and it was almost a bit frightening. Sometimes small, glittering eyes stared at them from behind the trees, and now and then something called to them from the ground or from the branches. A beautiful night, Moomintroll heard a voice right behind him. Fine, he answered bravely, and a small shadow slunk past him in the dusk. On the beach it was lighter. A pale blue shimmer hung over the sea and sky, and far out the birds cried their lonely cries. Night was already over. Snufkin and Moomintroll carried the hobgoblin's hat up to the cave and put it, brim downwards, in the darkest corner, so that nothing would be able to fall into it. "Now we've done the best we can," said Snufkin, "and imagine if we can only get those 5 small clouds back." "Yes," said Moomintroll, who stood in the opening of the cave, looking out at the sea, "though I wonder if they can make it any more wonderful than it is just now."